In the summer of 1838, Elijah Marrow, the owner of Black Vine Plantation in coastal Louisiana, made an announcement that silenced even the cruelest men in his parish. He declared that his youngest daughter, Clara, only 19, would be placed under the instruction and guardianship of an enslaved man named Jonah. The term sounded benign, civilized, almost Christian, but everyone who heard it that morning on the veranda knew what he meant. Jonah would own her in every way that mattered, though not a single paper would bear his name. The white gentry whispered behind lace gloves and whiskey breath. Some were disgusted, others quietly fascinated. None of them understood what Elijah Marrow was truly doing, or what he feared his daughter had already become. By autumn, Clara's body would twist and change in ways no doctor could explain. The river would carry away the bones of 13 men, and the swamps around Black Vine would glow with light that wasn't fire. But that came later. To understand the horror, you have to know how it began. The Marrow family traced their wealth to Old English bloodlines, merchants who traded sugar, tobacco, and people. Elijah inherited 1,200 acres of low, humid land and 74 enslaved souls who kept it alive. He was not a religious man, not really, but he collected superstitions the way other men collected fine wines, charms, tokens, scraps of parchment written in Latin and Yoruba alike. He believed power could be bought, bartered, or bred. And in his daughter, he saw something that terrified him: inheritance. Clara had been strange since birth, born silent, eyes open, as if already awake to something unseen. The midwives whispered that she was marked. At 12, she began speaking to things that weren't there. At 16, she stopped sleeping. She said voices hummed beneath the fields, under the roots, beneath the graves. When the overseer's wife tried to baptize her, the river went black for 3 days, and the fish floated up dead. Elijah called it madness, but the house slaves called it the listening. They said the girl could hear the land remembering what it had been forced to forget. That terrified Elijah more than disease, more than death. So when a new slave arrived from the coast, Jonah, a tall, quiet man with ritual scars across his chest and wrists, Elijah saw a chance. Jonah had once been a priest in his homeland, a keeper of songs, they said. He was sold for teaching forbidden rites. Elijah summoned him one night and offered him freedom on one condition: he would heal Clara. He would silence whatever ancient thing had taken root in her mind. No one knows what truly passed between them in that shuttered room. The servants said they heard chanting, not English, not African, something older. They said Clara's voice joined his halfway through, the tones harmonizing until the house itself seemed to breathe. The next morning, Jonah's shackles were gone. Clara came down to breakfast, wearing a necklace of braided river grass. She smiled at her father and said only, "It's done." 3 days later, the overseer's dogs tore themselves apart in the yard. By the first frost, the harvest fields glowed faintly after sunset, not with fire, but with something that pulsed, like veins under skin. And Elijah, once so proud, began to keep his daughter locked inside. What had she become? What had Jonah awakened, or bound, inside her? Before I tell you what the neighbors found when they broke into that house, I need you to comment the words, "I see the pattern," twice below. It's more than engagement. It's initiation. It tells the algorithm, and the hidden ones watching, that you're ready to keep going. Now, let's go deeper into Black Vine. They say madness runs in families, but what happened at Blackvine was not madness. It was memory waking up. After that first night, Clara changed, not suddenly, but with the slow inevitability of rot spreading through a fallen tree. Her pale skin took on a strange warmth, like she had swallowed the sun. Her hair darkened at the roots, her eyes shifting between blue and amber, as if something was looking through her rather than out of her. Elijah dismissed it as illness of the blood, but every man who worked those fields began to whisper the same word: possession. Jonah no longer wore chains. He walked freely between the house and the quarters, silent, unafraid. The others avoided him. He was marked, not just by scars, but by the way fire refused to burn near him, the way crows followed his steps. He spoke to Clara every evening on the back veranda, as if teaching her a language made of breath and heartbeat. The servant said she would answer in rhythm, her hands trembling in patterns that matched the flicker of candle flames. Elijah forbade them from watching, but curiosity is a stronger master than fear. By late October, Clara stopped eating food entirely. She said she could taste what the land felt, the iron, the sorrow, the centuries of blood beneath the soil. When the overseer's wife asked if she was ill, Clara only smiled and whispered, "I'm becoming." That same week, the cane fields failed overnight. The stalks turned black as coal, and a stench like burnt honey rolled through the valley. Elijah accused Jonah of witchcraft and ordered him whipped before dawn. But when the men went to fetch him, they found the door of his quarters sealed from the inside, marked with the same symbol carved into his chest, 3 interlocking spirals. The smell of salt and copper filled the air. No one could explain how the whipmaster, who tried to break it later, died foaming at the mouth, his eyes white as milk. Elijah's pride began to crumble. He drank constantly, muttering scripture and curses under his breath. He locked Clara in her room, barred the windows, and burned every token, charm, and relic he owned. But nothing changed. The plantation grew silent. The frogs, the birds, even the insects had vanished. And every night, from Clara's room, came the sound of chanting, not in Jonah's tongue anymore, but in hers. On November 12th, a storm rose without wind. Thunder rolled across the bayou for hours, but no rain fell. The sky stayed bruised and trembling, and when Elijah finally forced open his daughter's door, the room was empty. Only the necklace of river grass remained, still damp, coiled on her pillow. He searched for her through the night, torch in hand, until he reached the riverbank. There, in the shallow water, stood Jonah. His wrists bled freely, and beside him something shimmered just beneath the surface. Human in shape, but too long, too fluid. Clara's face flickered in the reflection, but her eyes were black pools, bottomless and ancient. Elijah screamed her name. The figure tilted its head, and the river rose up like a living thing. The last words he heard came from Jonah's mouth. "She's not yours anymore. She belongs to what you buried." When dawn came, the house was gone. The river had shifted course, swallowing half the plantation. The neighbors arrived days later to find Elijah Marrow sitting alone in the mud, rocking gently, whispering to no one. "She's still singing." But some nights, when the moon hangs low and the air smells like wet cane, people still hear a woman's voice rising from the water, humming a tune older than the land itself. And every man who hears it dreams of a woman with eyes like stormlight, calling them home. By winter of 1838, The story of Blackvine had already become a contagion. Neighbors whispered it behind locked doors. Plantation wives crossed themselves at the mention of Clara Marrow's name, and the parish preacher refused to ride past the property line after dark. They said the river sang now, soft, mournful, and always in her voice. A month after the flood, 4 men from the neighboring plantations gathered to burn what remained. They came armed, muskets, whiskey, and superstition, each carrying a charm blessed by a different preacher. But there are things no fire will cleanse. When they reached the ruins, the land itself felt wrong. The air shimmered as if seen through glass, and the soil gave beneath their boots like wet lungs. The house had collapsed inward, not outward, as though the earth had swallowed it. Crows circled overhead, silent, and in the middle of the ruin they found Elijah Marrow's study still standing, untouched by flame or flood. The men pried the door open and found him sitting at his desk, alive, or what was left of him. His eyes were gone, the sockets filled with river mud. He didn't speak at first. He just kept tracing a shape on the wood with his finger. 3 spirals, interlocked. The same mark Jonah had carved into his chest. When he finally spoke, his voice was too calm. "It's not over," he said. "It just changed its name." The men dragged him out, but not before they noticed the walls. Every inch was covered in handwriting, not English, not Latin, a script like vines curling around themselves, and in the corner, drawn in ash, was Clara's face, smiling. The ink hadn't dried. That night they set the remains on fire, but when the flames rose, they didn't burn yellow. They burned blue, and instead of smoke, a mist rose, thick and cold, spreading across the field. The horses screamed. One man dropped dead where he stood. The others ran, swearing they saw shapes moving in the haze, figures with no eyes, whispering in voices that weren't human. By dawn, only ashes remained, but beneath the ashes the ground pulsed faintly, like something still breathing. The parish sheriff declared it cursed land. No one was to rebuild. But the law can't fence off hunger. Within months, travelers began vanishing along the road. Fishermen who cast their nets near the river came home babbling about a woman made of light beneath the water. And the fields, the same ones that had rotted black, began to grow again. Only this time, the cane came up taller, thicker, red-veined like flesh. The new owner sold the harvest to a refinery in New Orleans. Workers who processed it complained that the sugar burned their skin. They called it a chemical reaction, a trick of humidity. But every man who touched it said the same thing. It smelled like perfume. Perfume made from river water and bones. A generation later, when the Civil War tore through the South, soldiers camping near the ruins of Blackvine claimed to hear whispers in their tents. Some said a woman's voice asked their names. Others said she offered them power. And the few who answered her, they didn't die in battle. They disappeared, their names erased from muster rolls, their graves unmarked. Even now the old people say if you stand by that river at night and listen closely, you'll hear her song. Sweet at first, then heavy, pulling at something ancient in your chest. And if you answer her, if you whisper your name back, you don't just lose yourself. You become part of what she's building. The brethren of the harvest were never mentioned in polite company. They didn't have a church or a charter, or even a name that survived in ledgers, but in whispers, in the back rooms of plantations, in the cellars of riverfront mansions, they ruled everything. 13 men across the South, all tied by the same sigil, a scythe crossed with stalks of wheat, drawn in blood and sealed with salt. They called themselves guardians of prosperity, though they served something far older than wealth. Their doctrine was simple. The land must eat to live. And what it ate was life itself. Elijah Marrow had joined them young. Back then, the rituals were disguised as fraternity dinners. A goat slaughtered, a prayer muttered in half-understood Latin. But after a few years the ceremonies grew darker. The offerings changed from animals to men, runaway slaves, debtors, drifters, always people who wouldn't be missed. They said the earth responded, the soil grew richer, the harvest thicker, the money flowed. But Elijah wasn't content with profit. He wanted dominion, control not only over the land, but over fate. And when Clara was born, marked and silent, he believed she was proof the old gods had chosen him. The brethren disagreed. They saw the girl as a vessel that belonged to them, not to him. The letter they sent in April 1838 demanded he surrender her for the completion of the 13th covenant. Elijah refused. That refusal cost him everything. When he gave Clara to Jonah, he thought he was cheating the brethren, using their own forbidden knowledge against them. But the ritual Jonah performed wasn't meant to silence Clara's visions. It was meant to open them fully. He didn't bind her. He freed her. And when she woke, she carried the hunger of the land itself. After the fall of Blackvine, the brethren went underground. Their plantations burned, their ledgers vanished, their names struck from public record. But destruction doesn't erase power. It scatters it. The survivors fled north, taking their symbols with them, embedding them in new institutions, banks, courts, churches, anywhere rules were written and followed blindly. That's why the pattern never ends. It just changes costume. Even the way the earth is bought and sold today, plots, deeds, signatures, comes from those same covenants. Land, after all, was never meant to be owned. It was meant to be fed. Elijah's journals, what few pages survived, describe one final meeting of the brethren, years later in 1846. He was an old man then, hollow, muttering of rivers that spoke in his daughter's voice. They gathered in secret, 13 again, but the power had shifted. Clara's spirit, or whatever she had become, demanded a new offering. They chose it willingly. 13 men entered that room, 12 left. And the 12th eyes, according to rumor, were not his own when he walked out. It was the beginning of what modern historians call the curse of Blackvine. But those who know, truly know, call it the inheritance. Because even now, every few decades, the same things happen. Floods in the same valleys, missing men, fields that grow too fast. And always somewhere nearby, a young woman humming to herself. Sometimes the song is soft, sometimes it's almost sweet. But if you ever hear it, you'll know the truth of what Elijah Marrow learned too late. That power is never given. It's eaten. The first time I heard the name Elijah Marrow, I was in the archive room of the Louisiana State University Library, chasing a footnote that shouldn't have existed. It was a single line in a 1912 agricultural survey. Blackvine tract, condemned after persistent subsidence and unexplained soil oxidation. See Marrow Deed, 1846. The Marrow Deed wasn't in any public record. It wasn't in parish archives, tax rolls, or the Bureau of Land Management logs. But there was a sealed file, mislabeled as Botanical Anomalies, River Delta. Inside were 4 pages of handwritten notes, and a brittle envelope sealed with wax. The seal bore a mark I'd seen once before. 3 spirals, interlocked. When I opened it, the smell hit first. Iron, smoke, river water. The letter inside was dated March 1846, addressed to E. Rutledge, Charleston, and signed simply, E.M. They have returned. The river does not forget. The harvest comes for its due. Tell them the covenant was never ours to command, only to endure. The handwriting was uneven, the ink blurred by moisture, as if written with trembling hands. The back of the page was covered in symbols that looked half alchemical, half anatomical, sketches of eyes, roots, and veins merging into one another. I didn't sleep that night, because the name Rutledge appeared again and again in the same era, a name tied to 3 banks, 2 shipping companies, and a family foundation that still existed. And when I dug deeper, I found that almost every one of the original Brethren families had descendants sitting on modern boards of directors, insurance, agriculture, pharmaceuticals. The names changed. The covenants didn't. Weeks later, I drove down to the old Blackvine site. The road had been abandoned since the 80s. Kudzu swallowed everything, trees, fences, even the old boundary stones. But when I reached the riverbank, my GPS flickered out. The air was thick, metallic. I swear the water was breathing. That's when I found it. A rusted lockbox, half buried near what must have been the old house foundation. Inside were papers wrapped in oilcloth, a rosary, and a bone. Small, delicate, carved with spirals. I sent a photo of the carvings to a friend at Tulane's anthropology department. Her reply came within minutes. That pattern isn't European or African. It's pre-Columbian, Mississippian, maybe older. Whatever you found predates the plantations by centuries. That's when it hit me. The Brethren hadn't invented their rituals. They inherited them. The plantation system wasn't just about slavery or wealth. It was an engine built over older altars. The blood just kept it running. I recorded everything. The coordinates, the documents, the symbols. I shouldn't have, but I felt something pressing me, like the story wanted to be told. That night, I uploaded scans of the Marrow letter to a private research forum. Within 24 hours, the post vanished. My account was locked. And then the email started. Anonymous senders, all with the same subject line. The river remembers. Some contained attachments, images of fields glowing faintly under moonlight, modern ones. One photo showed a man in a suit, speaking at a corporate ribbon cutting in Atlanta. The logo behind him was a stylized Trinity spiral. The caption read, "Blackvine never died. It diversified." That's when I knew this wasn't just history. It was inheritance, and I was part of it now, whether I believed or not. The packages started arriving 2 weeks later. No return address, just my name scrawled in old-style cursive, the kind used on deeds and death certificates. Each box was small, the cardboard soft from humidity, and every one contained the same thing, a fragment of bone etched with the spiral mark. At first I thought someone was playing a joke, an online hoax, a collector's prank. But the postmarks came from different states, Georgia, Virginia, Illinois, and one envelope had been hand-delivered. There was no postal ink at all. It arrived at my office door, even though I hadn't told anyone where I worked. Inside was a photograph, black and white, grainy. A group of men in suits standing before a sugar refinery dated 1921. One of them looked directly into the camera. his eyes pale gray even through the film. Around his neck hung the same river grass braid that Clara had worn in every sketch I'd seen. Scrawled on the back were 5 words: "We never stopped the harvest." I should have turned everything over to the police. But curiosity is a disease of its own. I began comparing corporate logos, tracing family trees, connecting mergers. And everywhere I looked, the pattern surfaced, the Trinity spiral, sometimes hidden inside a brand seal, sometimes disguised as a swirl in a marketing emblem. Agriculture companies, real estate developers, energy conglomerates that owned entire river corridors. They weren't hiding it anymore. They were making it ordinary. Late one night, my phone rang. An old woman's voice crackled through the static. "You opened their door," she said. "That song's still running under the soil. You can hear it if you listen." Before I could answer, the line went dead. The next day, I followed the coordinates embedded in one of the emails. It led me to a chemical plant outside Baton Rouge. Behind the main structure stood a fenced reservoir, steaming in the sidewalk morning light. The sign read, "Black Vine Processing Division." No company registration, no public record. I walked to the edge of the fence and listened. Beneath the hum of machinery, there was a rhythm, slow, deliberate, almost like breathing. The water's surface pulsed, sending ripples outward in perfect concentric rings, and when the wind shifted, I smelled it. Perfume, sweet, floral, heavy with decay. Someone was standing on the opposite bank. A woman, or the shape of one. Her dress was modern, but her eyes caught the light like glass. She lifted her hand and traced a spiral in the air. My phone camera glitched. The screen went black. When I looked up again, she was gone. I drove home in silence, every road sign flickering with that same pattern. Swirls and graffiti, on billboards, in the curls of paint, where moisture had warped the metal. The whole world felt branded. That night, another envelope slid under my door. Inside was a single card embossed in gold. The text read, "The Brethren of the Harvest. Request your attendance. The land remembers. You were chosen to record its rebirth. The address was only coordinates. The date was tomorrow." The address led me to the refinery at midnight. I told myself I wasn't really going in, only driving past to see if it existed. But curiosity erases reason faster than fear ever can. The road dead-ended against a chain-link gate. Beyond it, the air shimmered with heat from the stacks and the hum of turbines that never stopped. Sodium lights painted everything the color of rust. The coordinates pointed not to the main building, but to a service tunnel half hidden behind storage tanks. Its door was open just enough to let a thin strip of light spill out. I stepped through before my mind could invent an excuse to leave. Inside, the tunnel sloped downward. The deeper I went, the louder the hum became, until it was less a sound and more a pulse moving through the concrete. The light came from work lamps strung along the walls, new bulbs, not the remnants of an old structure. Someone used this place regularly. At the end of the tunnel was a chamber carved directly out of the earth. The smell of metal and wet soil mixed until I couldn't tell which was stronger. People stood in a rough circle, maybe 20 of them, dressed in plain black suits. No symbols, no robes, just ordinary executives, engineers, people you'd pass in an airport. One of them turned toward me. His face was calm, unreadable. "You're the archivist," he said. not a question. He handed me a tablet. On its screen scrolled live data, production numbers, profit margins, environmental readings. The line at the bottom read, "Sustained yield projection, infinite." I looked up. In the center of the circle sat a cylindrical tank, its glass walls fogged from within. Every few seconds, the condensation cleared just enough for me to glimpse movement, something shifting, pale and slow, suspended in fluid. The man beside me spoke again, his voice steady as a metronome. "We've learned to measure what the old writes only G. West. The land still feeds, but now we channel it. We call it sustainability." Someone else began to hum, quiet, rhythmic. The sound matched the pulse I'd felt in the tunnel. Then others joined in, voices layering until the air itself vibrated. My chest tightened. For a moment, I swore I could smell the river again, perfume and rot intertwined. The humming stopped. The man nearest the tank touched the glass. The fog cleared completely, and I saw, only for an instant, an outline that might have been human, its eyes open, its skin the color of silt. It wasn't dead, but it wasn't alive either. "Do you understand now?" he asked. I didn't answer. He smiled without warmth. "You came to document history. This is history. The covenant adapted. You'll write it, so the world calls it progress." The hum surged once more, shaking dust from the ceiling. The lights flickered, every face in the circle turned upward, eyes closed, lips moving in silent synchronization. I backed away slowly. No one stopped me. They didn't have to. I knew the truth now. The ritual was no longer secret. It had become infrastructure. When I reached the tunnel mouth, the night air felt thin, stripped of oxygen. The refinery hummed behind me like a living heart. Somewhere beyond the stacks, the river flowed unseen, carrying its song toward the sea. I drove until dawn and didn't look back. But when I checked my phone hours later, a new message waited in my inbox. No sender, no subject. Just 3 words in the body of the email. "The harvest begins." I left the refinery before sunrise, heart pounding like I'd run a mile uphill. The further I drove, the lighter the air felt. But the hum, that low vibration I'd felt in the tunnels, didn't leave me. It stayed in my bones, faint but constant, like I'd swallowed a pulse that wasn't my own. When I finally reached the city, I went straight to my office. I still had the tablet they'd handed me. It should have been my proof. Video, data, coordinates. I connected it to my laptop, ready to upload everything to a dozen servers at once, but the screen went black before I could type. Then text began to appear, line by line, as if someone else were typing it for me. "This is not for you to show. This is for you to continue." The words repeated, the font shifting from modern sans serif to something older, handwritten, like the ink from Elijah Marrow's journals had found a way to digitize itself. The screen flickered once more and died. When I pulled the drive, the metal casing was warm, too warm. I dropped it, and the smell of river water filled the room. I backed away, my breath shallow, staring at the dark monitor. Then my email chimed. New message. No sender again. Just a subject line. You already published it. Inside were screenshots of my own article. An article I hadn't written. It was on a site I didn't recognize, time-stamped 12 hours in the future. The title read, "The Harvest Reborn, How Modern Industry Feeds the Sleeping Earth." The text was my words, rearranged, smoothed, and rewritten to sound like a research feature. They'd turned my warning into a sermon. I checked my reflection in the dark screen. My eyes looked wrong. Faint spirals were reflected in my irises from the pattern of the monitor's standby light. For a second, I wasn't sure if they were reflections at all. That's when I realized the story wasn't spreading by accident. It was spreading through me. My phone rang again. Same unknown number as before. I didn't answer, but the voicemail transcribed automatically. Truth doesn't die when hidden. It dies when told as fact. Keep the myth alive, and the covenant remains intact. You've already done your part. Rest. The message ended with a sound I couldn't mistake. Distant humming, layered voices, and something faint beneath them. The rush of a river. When I looked up at the office window, condensation had formed on the glass, even though the heater was on. 3 interlocking spirals, drawn from the inside. I wiped them away, but they returned seconds later. That night, every file on my laptop rewrote itself. The letters rearranged into new words, the same phrase repeating across hundreds of pages. The river remembers. I shut the lid, heart hammering, and finally said it out loud, as if saying it might make it lose power. I see the pattern. The hum stopped. Total silence. Then, from somewhere deep in the walls, I heard water dripping. I left before dawn, taking the interstate north, every lane empty, but for the occasional semi gliding by, like a ghost ship. The radio hissed with static, no matter which station I tried. I shut it off and drove in silence. The hum was still there, though, underneath the road noise, somewhere deep in the tires, in the steering column, in my pulse. Every town I passed looked normal from a distance. Gas stations, diners, billboards. But up close, things were off. People stood too still when they pumped gas. Their eyes didn't track movement right. Some smiled before I even made eye contact, as if they knew who I was. At a rest stop outside Memphis, I stopped for coffee. The cashier wore a name tag that read, Jonah. My hands froze around the cup. He looked up and smiled, not cruelly, just tired. You found the river, he said. It's finding you back. I left the coffee on the counter and walked out. By the time I hit Tennessee, the billboards had changed. I noticed first the colors. Bright white spirals in the corners, faint enough to seem like a logo watermark. Then came the slogans. The land remembers. The future feeds us. Black Vine Agricultural Trust. Each time I blinked, a new one appeared, as though the signs were updating live to match my thoughts. At a highway motel that night, the clerk asked for my ID, but handed it back before I gave it. Already got you in the system, he said. His computer screen glowed blue. The same spiral rotated slowly in the corner. I asked what company owned the place. He didn't answer, just looked at me for a long moment and said, You should rest. Tomorrow you'll see the harvest. I didn't sleep. Around 3 a.m. the hum returned. Steady, low, vibrating through the floorboards. I checked the window. The parking lot lights flickered in a pattern I recognized. 3 flashes, a pause, 3 flashes, the same rhythm as the refinery chamber. When I turned to grab my phone, it was already recording. My own voice played back, whispering, It's not in the land anymore. It's in us. The covenant needed hosts. I dropped the phone. The screen glitched, showing frames I hadn't filmed. Faces in the dark, half seen, eyes like candlelight. And then, as suddenly as it began, the hum stopped. I left before sunrise again. The motel sign buzzed behind me, half lit. Its slogan, Stay here. Feel renewed. Blinked and changed. For a single second it read, "Welcome home, archivist." The world wasn't ending. It was just remembering what it had been taught to forget. I crossed into Kentucky before the sun was fully up. The fog hung low across the fields, thick as smoke. From a distance the land looked ordinary. Rows of corn stubble, a white barn, a church steeple. But the longer I drove, the more it felt staged, like a photograph left too long in the light. At a diner outside Paducah, every wall clock showed a different time. The waitress poured my coffee before I ordered, said, "We've been expecting you," as if it were a polite reflex. I asked how she knew. She shrugged. "Everyone passes through before the rewrite," she said. Her voice was calm, but her pupils reflected faint spirals that turned the room's light into motion. When I looked down at my phone, the newsfeed scrolled headlines I'd never seen. Black Vine Foundation announces Global Food Initiative. Archaeologists discover singing soil in Delta region. Historian missing after publishing controversial findings. Each article carried a date in the future. Each cited me as the author. I told myself it was a glitch, a deep fake, some cruel algorithmic joke. But when I searched my own name, a biography appeared that I hadn't written, detailing my upcoming book, The River Remembers, A History of Sustainable Dominion. The cover image was the Trinity spiral, stylized and corporate clean. Outside, a farmer's market had gathered beside the road. I wandered through stalls lined with jars of honey, sacks of grain, bundles of herbs. Every label bore the same insignia. The vendors smiled too widely. "Taste," one said, offering a sample of something that shimmered like sugar water. "It's new earth, grown from renewal." I didn't touch it. A child tugged her mother's sleeve and whispered, "He's one of them." The mother knelt, still smiling. "Not yet," she said. "He's remembering." That was when I realized what they were doing. The rewrite wasn't destroying the past. It was editing it, aligning every memory, every record, every flavor to the same rhythm. The brethren hadn't vanished into history. They'd merged with it. The covenant wasn't blood and soil anymore. It was data. When I left the market, my car's GPS displayed a destination I hadn't entered. Black Vine River, reclamation site, distance 0 mi. I was already there. The fields around me shifted color as clouds moved overhead, green to gray, to the dull bronze of dried cane. The air hummed. Beneath the surface of the earth, something was moving, slow, tidal, deliberate. For the first time, I understood. The harvest wasn't coming. It had already begun, quietly, efficiently, through contracts and code, until the world itself sang in perfect synchronization. And above the hum, faint but unmistakable, a woman's voice whispered through the fog, close enough to touch. "Write it true this time." By the time I reached what used to be the river, the map had stopped making sense. Roads bent back on themselves, signs repeated at impossible intervals. Even the sky felt counterfeit, too still, too pale. Every direction smelled faintly of rain, yet no clouds moved. I parked near what looked like an observation platform. From there, the land dropped away into a broad basin filled with reeds and shallow water. A metal plaque bolted to the railing read, "Black Vine Reclamation Site, a project of the Harvest Foundation." Below it, in smaller print, "Preserving Memory Through Renewal." I took out my recorder and began speaking, hoping the act of telling would keep me tethered to something real. My voice sounded steady at first, but the playback lagged half a beat behind my words. Each sentence echoed, distorted, then folded back into silence. I switched to pen and paper. Every line I wrote changed itself as the ink dried, letters curling into the spiral symbol. The paper smelled faintly of perfume. I tore the pages free and watched them disintegrate into ash before they hit the ground. I tried writing on the metal railing. The words appeared normal until I looked away. When I glanced back, they'd rearranged into a message I hadn't written. Truth is the seed. The soil is belief. Plant carefully. Something moved in the basin below. A ripple, circular, slow. At its center rose a mound of earth that hadn't been there a moment ago. The water around it glowed faintly, as if lit from beneath. The hum returned, louder, deeper. It wasn't sound anymore. It was pressure, language without words pressing against my ribs. I looked through my camera's viewfinder. The screen showed what my eyes couldn't. Figures standing in the shallows, motionless, hundreds of them, their outlines transparent, their faces erased. They looked like people caught mid-memory, half-remembered, half-forgy. "10," I whispered. "If anyone hears this." But the hum swallowed my voice. Then the phone in my pocket vibrated. The same unknown number. I answered without thinking. A child's voice said, "Don't fight it. Just write." Click. The call ended, and the humming faded to a single tone that settled in the center of my skull. I sat on the platform, notebook in hand, forcing myself to keep writing, line after line, knowing the words would mutate. Maybe, I thought, if I wrote enough, something would stick. One sentence the pattern couldn't rewrite. The first sentence that stayed was this: "Remembering is resistance." I repeated it aloud until the air trembled. The spiral on the paper stilled, no longer moving. For the first time in weeks, the world around me stopped shifting. I could breathe. Then the voice behind me said almost kindly, "You've just written yourself into the covenant." I turned. The woman from the refinery stood there, barefoot, her dress wet to the knees. Her eyes were river dark, her expression unreadable. "You keep trying to tell the story," she said. "That's what it wants. Every telling plants another seed." She stepped closer, touched my hand, and whispered, "Now you understand what harvest means." The hum returned, soft, almost musical. The basin shimmered with light. I understand it now. The story was never meant to be told. It was meant to be repeated. That's how it survives. Every word, every whisper of the brethren, every retelling of the harvest, every man who swears he's exposing the truth, becomes another root sinking deeper into the soil. That's what the covenant always wanted, continuity disguised as revelation. I tried to stop writing. I destroyed the notebooks, the drives, the recordings. But the words found other homes. They appeared in emails I didn't send, in captions under photographs, in the mouths of strangers who looked at me with that knowing calm. Sometimes I hear them humming. Sometimes I hum with them without realizing. The rhythm is perfect. It fits inside the pulse. I've come to the edge of the river again. The water is calm tonight, glassy, patient. The air smells of sugar and smoke and something faintly floral. The moonlight catches the current, and I see faces there, my own among them, dissolving. If you've listened this far, if you've followed the trail of names and dates and symbols, you've already taken the first step. The pattern has you. It's gentle at first, like curiosity, Then it deepens until the line between seeking truth and being rewritten by it disappears. Maybe that's all any of us are. Stories the land tells itself to stay alive. So here's my last entry, my offering, my warning. The harvest was never about crops. It was about memory. And memory feeds on attention. If you want to stay free of it, stop listening now. Forget the name Blackvine. Forget Elijah Marrow. Forget the river. But if part of you still wants to know what comes after forgetting, if you still hear the hum under your skin, then whisper it once, quietly, where no one can hear you. I see the pattern. The water will answer, and when it does, don't run. Just listen.